Welcome to the Sierra Fund's Reclaiming the Sierra and Restoring Headwaters Resiliency Conference. My name is Izzy Martin, and I'm the CEO of the Sierra Fund. When I was a little girl, my parents used to take me backpacking and camping all over the Sierra, like their parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents had done before them. I'm a fifth-generation Californian. And I fell in love with the Sierra Nevada. The rivers, the mountains, the forests. But I wasn't the first person to fall in love with this place. Thousands of years before we got here, people had been tending this landscape, using what are now understood to be very brilliant scientific tools: selective cultivation, fire burning of the underbrush to stimulate growth. After their thousands of years of management, the fish were literally jumping out of the river. The food was dropping off of the trees. It was a very civilized place. When Rome fell, the trading villages and roots of this area were already thousands of years old. This culture was much older than the culture that we came from. When my first ancestors came out here, one of them was a trapper with Kit Carson. The wildlife was so thick, it was abundant. The birds filled the skies. Their wings blackened the skies in the daytime. The estuary of the west coast of the United States hosted the Pacific Flyway, the largest estuary on the west coast of the United States. And then gold was discovered. Over the next 150 years, miners flooded into the place, shooting anything that moved, chopping down anything that grew, digging holes everywhere, looking for anything. The discovery of gold changed everything. Despite this obvious fact, when the Sierra Fund began working to understand what happened here, we discovered that almost no one but the Indians, the scientists, and a few historians were even remotely aware of the lasting environmental, cultural, and health impacts of the gold rush. We learned with heavy hearts the impact of this invasion on the original people in the area, who were either killed or enslaved unless they were able to run away. We learned that during this time, nearly every tree was cut down to timber the mines and build the towns of the gold strikes on the east and west sides of the Sierra. They were also used to run the fuel for the stamp mills that ran 24 hours a day for 100 years in the towns of the gold country. Later, fire in the area was suppressed to protect local communities and in the misguided idea that forest fires were bad. We learned that nearly every drop of water was captured behind dams, and hundreds of miles of ditches were dug to convey that water down to hydraulic monitors that were used to tear mountains apart looking for gold. So much rock and sediment flowed down into the valley, the rivers rose, they flooded. A third of the San Francisco Bay filled with sediment. It got so bad that the riverboat pilots couldn't get from San Francisco to Sacramento without getting out and beginning to dredge canals through this muck of hydraulic mining sediment that was blocking their access to the Sacramento and the estuary. In fact, that muck and sediment wasn't just from sand and gravel from the Sierra, it was also included mercury that had been mined on the coast, retorted down into elemental mercury, and brought up to the Sierra Nevada, which was used for gold processing. Millions of pounds were used in this way of mercury, and millions of pounds were left behind in our headwater. We learned that to feed the hundreds of thousands of miners that had poured into the state, the gold country became a major food production along with the valley below it. The upper watershed had cattle roaming around to feed the miners, bringing with them invasive weeds, incising streams, trampling down the formerly resilient soils of the meadows, while bears, wolves, and mountain lions who preyed upon domestic animals were slaughtered and brought to extinction in many areas. When the price of gold fell too low, the miners just walked away, leaving their holes. But some of the old mining features were repurposed to modern uses. The old canal and reservoir system formed the early infrastructure for California's water and hydroelectric power system, delivering water to the gold country farms and ranches and towns that sprang up and have now become key tourist destinations. The newly cleared forests invited subdivision and development, and fire suppression became the primary forest management tool. The result of 175 years of these activities is before us today. Almost nothing you see in the Sierra Nevada today is what it was before it became the epicenter and one of the largest gold rushes in history. After 100 years of fire suppression, the forests are dangerously overgrown, with pockets of houses and businesses sometimes completely surrounded by forests and dying trees. The water infrastructure built so long ago, and in some cases not so long ago, Oroville Dam is younger than me, is showing signs of wear and threatening the reliability of our water supply. The former healthy estuary, which we now call the San Francisco Bay and Delta, is falling apart. Its fish and food web are contaminated with mercury and other heavy metals. Scientists tell us that without intervention, this mercury, which is not native to the Sierra Nevada, will continue to flow out of our Sierra for the next 10,000 years. Worse, our native fish so abundant that when our folks first got here, they would say you could walk across the river when the fish were running upstream. They were thick with salmon. The salmon are nearly extinct. What happened to the salmon? Well, they're endangered in large part because access to their spawning grounds has been stopped by main stem dams on every major river flowing from the Sierra Nevada down into the Central Valley. The fish can't get home. None of this was done by aliens attacking our Earth. Darth Vader has nothing to do with what I'm talking about. We did it. The humans that got here less than 200 years ago took a landscape that had been managed by humans since the beginning of time and have wrecked it from the Sierra to the sea. And now I'm switching to a PowerPoint. The first victims of the gold rush were humans, followed by the plants and animals. The impact of gold mining is foundational to our statehood. There, you were going to actually get to see my whole speech just a minute ago. The impacts of the gold mining are foundational to our state. Look at this great seal of the state of California up here on the left, and then a highlight from the brass plaque in front of the state capitol. This seal is all about one thing: getting the gold out of the ground as fast as possible, putting it on a ship, and sending it back to the east coast of the United States of America. Miners couldn't even sell their gold to whoever they wanted. They had to sell it to the United States. That's one reason we have a state, so that the United States could get all that gold. Right here, on the brass plate, miner, his equipment, mercury flask. That's why when the Sierra Fund started to try to take on the challenges in the Sierra, the first thing we wanted to do was to address the ecological footprint of the gold rush. It stretches from the Sierra to the sea. And you've heard a lot from the Sierra Fund over the last 10 years about gold mining, but we're here today to say we are actually broadening our language now. We have broadened our mission statement, and we have a new strategic plan. It's a platform for action to rebuild ecosystem and community resiliency in the Sierra Nevada. What's different about this new mission is that we are putting human beings, communities, smack dab in the center of what we are talking about. The big mistake we believe that was made in the 19th century was to ignore the local people. Not ignore them, enslave them, kill them, suppress them, find them to be non-human. We didn't listen to anything they knew. Sadly, this tendency continues to this very day. Right now, as we speak, people are marching into villages in South America, in Africa, in Indonesia, enslaving and murdering people and turning them into gold miners. Even in our own state, the locals where we live are both basically left out of the conversation about the future of the Sierra Nevada. Many organizations and agencies which are making plans about our area are working without meaningful input from the people that live in the Sierra. We believe the only way to protect the resources of our region that the state and the world depend upon is to engage the human beings of our area in meaningful identification of problems and solutions. And the humans have to benefit from those solutions, the humans that live in the Sierra. The Sierra Fund has worked to identify the key players in our area and in this region and to take the time to learn about their ways. tribal government, local, state, and federal government, the industries that built this region, including the mining industry with whom we have close personal relations. You'll note that we have Tykert Mining Company as one of the sponsors of this event. We work with conservation and community organizations. We work with downstream representatives from the urban areas. Working with these leaders, we've identified critical threats to the Sierra Nevada ecosystems and communities and developed compelling new insights into these issues by collecting data and understanding the human and political infrastructure of our region. This is in contrast to what we call random acts of conservation, where single-issue, narrowly focused solutions are proposed for ecosystem-wide problems. One such example is the attempt to solve the problem of fighting extinction of one species of salmon on the Yuba River by implementing a hugely expensive trap and haul system that may or may not work, instead of insisting on improving volitional fish passage, which would provide multiple ecosystem benefits. So we propose, instead of random acts of conservation, large scope, with detail, programs that solve multiple problems, bringing multiple benefits. Now, there's lots to think about when you try to save the Sierra. It's huge. It has very few people in it. They're very sparsely populated of this part of the state. About 1% of the people that vote in the state live in the 22-county area of the Sierra. Almost everybody that represents the Sierra is very conservative. There's a handful of people that are at the local county level, maybe on school district boards or on county supervisors, but mostly everybody else is very, very conservative. And we are an area of deep poverty. We have areas of our place that are hugely wealthy castles living right next to hovels. It's almost like the olden days of Scotland that my people fled 400 years ago. Another really striking thing about where we live is that the federal government owns most of it. If you look at this map here, this is the whole area. There's a huge amount of this which is owned by the federal government. 90% of Inyo and Mono counties are owned by either the federal government or Los Angeles County. There's also one other landowner. It's Sierra Pacific Industries. They bought the land from the Southern Pacific Railroads, and they have what's called the checkerboard pattern. They are the largest private landowner in the Sierra. Between the federal government and SPI, most of our area is owned by these absentee landowners. Now, absentee landowners isn't a term lots of you have heard about before. Almost the entire Sierra is owned in this way. The people that own that land don't live there. Absentee land ownership has long been understood to create havoc and poverty in rural regions. One of the most important principles we bring to our new platform for action is the crucial role of community and economic development to create resiliency, to restore the Sierra Nevada. The stewardship role, the importance of people making a commitment to the land, is not a new policy idea. Even as the gold rush was unfolding, our country was struggling with how to manage the new enormous landscape that gold miners were crossing to get to California in an effort to stabilize and conquer the Indians of the Midwest. The Congress adopted an extraordinary program to settle the Midwest. The 1862 Homestead Act took land stolen from the Indians and handed it to settlers that were willing to make a commitment to that property. 160 acres, if they would build a house, it had to have a glass window. There were very specific items in the legislation. You had to plant crops. You had to make a certain number of years of time commitment to that region. The same concept came up later in the 1872 Mining Act. It said you can take all the gold you want, but if you want to establish a gold claim, you have to go on to that claim every year. You have to maintain it with your energy. You have to prove that you've put money into the place. They just didn't hand it over. They required a stewardship, a commitment to that property. The 1902 Reclamation Act promised to bring water to the farmers. We're going to hear more about this, I believe, from Lori Mott later this morning. But the gift of that water came with a commitment. You had to move on to the property. You had to farm it. You had to build a house. Now, I think we all know that a lot of cheating, stealing, and lying went on in all of these different things I've just described, the 1862, the 1902. None of those rules were obeyed, but that was nevertheless the intention. Our great-grandmothers and grandfathers knew that residency was a vital component to stewardship. Or as farmers say, the best fertilizer on your land is your shadow, is you standing there, you being there. The relationship between land use and economic resiliency has long been studied. Walter Goldschmidt, in 1947's study, As You Sow, found a relationship between the average farm size of farms around a community and that community's health, measured in terms of things like graduated from high school, people that were voting, the average wage in the community. More recently, research from the Northwest has shown that diversity of communities strengthens the resiliency of that community. Its ability to adapt to change is what we're talking about with community resiliency. Diversity in education, diversity in wealth, stage of family life cycles, ethnicity, etc., may enable a rural area to have more sustainable resiliency than those that don't have that kind of diversity. One of the key findings of this research is that the mixture of people, lifestyle diversity, may be more important to providing resiliency than sheer number of people, population density. Now, a new absentee land ownership pattern is being advanced by conservation organizations, mostly led and funded by folks that live far away and look at our place on a map. They call these conservation acquisitions. And some hope to use greenhouse gas money to purchase forests in order to protect them from development so that the trees can absorb carbon and other climate change gases. These new environmental conservation acquisitions, sometimes working closely with local land trusts and sometimes not, create a whole new player on our landscape. Their interest and investment in our region is welcome. Don't get me wrong, I am in support of conservation acquisitions. But we must make sure that as these acquisitions occur, community economic and environmental resiliency is not ignored or treated as an afterthought. This means that there needs to be a new stewardship requirement for these kinds of government-subsidized large landscape acquisitions. The government must begin insisting on a residency requirement. So, back to our vision of headwater resiliency for ecosystems and communities. What are we really promoting? We are interested in supporting communities and ecosystems' ability to recover from change. That's all we're really talking about, whether it be global climate change or economic change. Our vision of a healthy community is that it's a healthy place to live, to work, to raise a family. It's got clean air, clean water, and soil, with residents who are protected, who are empowered to protect and, if needed, to restore these resources. Further, we believe that the people who live on the landscape and in the region must lead the effort to protect the region's people and resources. This is especially true for the original people of the area, and it's also true for the new residents who are most directly impacted by environmental and economic forces in their communities. This concept informs our stewardship strategies. For example, this means that large-scale acquisition should improve community vitality. And that challenge cannot be met unless local leaders and place-based knowledge, coupled with traditional ecological knowledge, leads and shapes that effort. It's the only way to make it work. And of course, our vision of restored ecosystem resiliency, for the scientists in the room, I'm sure this is a lot more comfortable of a topic, in concert with community resiliency, requires that we understand and support rebuilding the ecosystem's ability to respond to change. This ability to recover from change or be resilient was basically damaged tremendously, if not incredibly destroyed, by the gold rush, which is why we get back to the gold rush. We need to create new resiliency for the regimes that move through our system. The Sierra knew how to deal with fire before we all got here. Climate change had happened for thousands of years. It adapted. Different precipitation. It had a whole way of dealing with sediment. An earthquake would occur, things would uplift, move around. Eventually, the system would recover. But it hasn't been able to recover from what's happened here. First, the gold rush. Then, 38 million people live here now. It's quite a few more than 200 years ago. There's been changes in land use affecting water use, water discharge, and now guess what? Climate change. So our goals are ambitious. I like this shot because it looks like the person's just flying off into outer space, which sort of, it seems like how our policy has been. We're driving down a road, we're pretty sure there's something on the other side of that hill, or we're driving into an avalanche, which is sort of like driving down Highway 101 right now. I don't know how many of you have done that. It's very frightening. I would say that our goals are ambitious and they may even be audacious. What are we trying to accomplish? We are taking responsibility for what happened to the people and the resources of the Sierra when the gold rush overran the place. We are trying to clean up the mercury and restore fish passage specifically. None of this is possible without getting the 37 million other Californians that don't live in the Sierra Nevada and all the people that live in the state of Nevada to support to support this effort. Why do we think we can do this? I mean, everybody's been saying this for years. Somebody needs to do something about the Sierra. We need to get the urbans to pay more attention to the Sierra. Why does the Sierra Fund think we can do this? I'll tell you why. Because we've already been doing it. In fact, we've been incredibly effective. When we started our work, almost nobody cared about the gold rush and its impacts. In 10 years, we've begun to make an impact on an issue that had been largely ignored for more than 100 years. The Sierra Fund has created a tool chest to do our work. We use science, policy, outreach, and community capacity building. And we have 4 basic approaches. We have a targeted approach to applied science. We study problems, we fill data gaps, we try to figure out how to fill more data gaps by implementing pilot projects. We engage diverse leaders in work to identify the needed changes, and then work with these leaders and scientists and the results of our research to inform and organize policy change around strategic objectives. And we build capacity in our region through fiscal sponsorship and collaboration. And we have a track record to show that even though we are tiny, we've been very effective. I used this picture just to showboat. Yeah, I know the governor and the secretary for resources. In just 10 years, we've sponsored legislation resulted in the most significant changes to the Surface Mining Act in a generation. And we did this by working directly with the folks most knowledgeable about and impacted by the legislation. We worked with the mining industry. We worked with the counties and cities that regulate mining. And we work with the communities that surround these mines, either proposed mines or active mines. And what was interesting about this was at the end of the day, we passed 2 bills. It was bipartisan support. And no environmentalists basically worked on it at all, except the Sierra Fund and a little help from Environmental Working Group. We led the campaign to require that all mining methods, including the use of suction dredgers for gold mining, have to meet the Clean Water Act. And we're continuing to watch how that legislation is implemented. We have brought literally dozens of legislators and key leaders to our region on tours. In fact, a year ago, we brought the entire California Legislative Black Caucus to Tahoe for 3 days to just show them what, and their children. And they brought everybody. They brought their grandmas, they brought their children, they brought their daughter's son's best friend. And we had 50 people up there, 3 days, showing them what the Sierra really looks like. Our work has had made real ground impacts on the ground. We have 3 examples. First, mercury. When we started our work, people thought that mercury was just not an issue and it would be impossible to clean up anyway. I held a event on this before I was at the Sierra Fund in August of the year 2000. And at that time, many of the organizations we now work with long believed that all the mercury had washed away 100 years ago. Now, however, research demonstrates that the old mining sites, the legacy hydraulic mining sites, discharge mercury whenever it rains. Those mines have never been cleaned up. When we began, many organizations believed that the dams were holding back the mercury that escaped the old mines. Research by USGS and others have shown this is not the case. Particulate-bound mercury flows out of reservoirs and travels down this river stream all the way as far as the delta. So we developed a conceptual model that identified 2 targets for headwater mercury source reduction, 2 opportunities to affect the fate and transport of mercury, the mines themselves, the point sources, and then the reservoirs, the downstream receiving reservoirs. We also realized that this goes all the way out to the delta. And we've been showing that it actually took until about 1.5 years ago for most of the scientists in the state to agree that the mercury arriving in the delta had come from mines upstream. We then created pilot projects to look at each of these opportunities to reduce discharge. Working with state parks and other partners, we've raised funds to assess mercury and sediment discharge from Malakoff-Diggins State Historic Park, which, by the way, is the target of the legal decision that stopped hydraulic mining, known as the Sawyer decision. The Sierra Fund has identified potential activities to address the chemical and physical hazards that we identified at the park. We've brought a couple of $1 million to the party on this. And as we speak, the governor has now endorsed this project and put $8 million into his budget to do cleanup at the, yeah, right, woohoo! $8 million. We are working with the Nevada Irrigation District to restore operational capacity of the Combie Reservoir on the Bear River. The Combie Reservoir has major sedimentation problems. You can see this plug of sediment that's working its way into the reservoir. The Nevada Irrigation District was stopped from dredging it because every time they did it, they floured the mercury and created a Clean Water Act discharge. With our financial and political support, NID developed a pilot project that's identified a way to remove the mercury while cleaning the sediment out of their reservoir and returning clean water to the reservoir. There's now $6 million of funding in the governor's budget to allow this shovel-ready project to expand to full commercial operation. Now, this project delivers multiple benefits, not only new water storage, clean water, it's also going to have sand, gravel, and gold come out of those products. This gold, recovered as part of as ecosystems restoration activity, has the potential to become what we're calling a new gold product, and we're going to be exploring that new gold product tomorrow at a workshop. The other thing we've started to work on, and for 10 years now, is the problem of fish consumption. When we started working, there was almost no data about mercury levels in Sierra Nevada fish, and when we asked about it, people said it doesn't matter because no one lives up there anyway. Back to the local folks being invisible. Right. So what we did was we went to the Office of Environmental Health Hazard and said, geez, you know, there's no fish advisory for our area. And they said, we don't have any data. And we said, well, we're pretty sure it's contaminated because our rivers are really contaminated. And we worked with that office for 3 years to get them to create this advisory here, which is now our job is to get this posted everywhere in the Sierra. And we've been working where we are. We're doing these post-it days where people get to go out and set up posters at all of the public fishing holes. That project has worked so successfully that now the Delta folks have begun to copy our work, and now they're going to do a post-it day down in the Delta. We've also been having interns catch 500 fish to grind their little bodies up to see how much mercury is actually in them. We've taken seriously the job of building community this whole time as we grew our programs. We have participated in rebuilding community organizations, participating in collaborative activities, and as a result, the Sierra Fund has helped bring $6.5 million to our region for a variety of water projects, including replacing Placerville's leaking pipes, a new water tank for Camptonville. My God, their thing was 150 years old. It was leaking all over the place. Circle has a beautiful meadow restoration project that came funding through us. We have continued and worked hard to advocate for disadvantaged community members to be part of water planning, part of water policy. I now serve on the Mountain County funding area along with our partner Shelley Covert, trying to help Department of Water Resources to do their disadvantaged community assessment. We provide fiscal sponsorship for organizations. For example, we have a staff person that lives down in the southeast part of California, down in Bridgeport, running the Bodie Hills Conservation Partners. We also seed the future. Our science director, Dr. Monahan, works with scientists that are up-and-coming master's degree students. A dozen master's degrees have been earned working with the Sierra Fund on our projects to help us understand what we're doing and to bring us data to fill our data gaps so that we can then advise policymakers and advance the kinds of policies I've talked about. Of course, we have more to do. And we have to do it because the damage we've done cannot be undone without human intervention. Our strategic plan builds on our successes and breathes life into our new mission statement through ongoing and development of 2 primary programs, which I'm not going to describe. I spent the last year writing them. You can read our strategic plan. It's online. We have copies of it here. We want to restore ecosystem resiliency. We want to build healthy communities. This is what we mean by building healthy communities. Assessment strategies to reduce exposure. Start getting the local folks involved in water planning. We have a huge number of programs on ecosystem resiliency. You'll see there's lots of conference workshops on these sorts of topics. We are also interested in building capacity. We do a lot of work in the Capitol to help the legislature understand where the Sierra, hard to believe, one of the biggest things I do when I walk into a new legislator's office, I pull out a map and I point to the Sierra. People are always saying, oh, I've never been to the Sierra, but I love Tahoe. So helping them understand where we are, what we need, and making sure that we are not completely left out of policy has been something we've worked on for many, many years. Our conference agenda reflects this broader set of interests and challenges facing both our communities and our ecosystems. As you'll see, our agenda today, we're focusing on challenges to California's aging water infrastructure, such things like sedimentation, the challenges presented by climate change, ideas for improving stewardship. The morning ends with a tribal perspective on water. After the speech from Lori Mott, you'll be taking a short break and then coming back and hearing a number of presentations. Look for our staff and our board here. This is the staff on the right. This is the board. I'm again showboating. I'm not on the board. These are the brains. These are the brawn. This is the skills. These are our leaders. But actually, you are all our leaders. So I'm hoping that you will make an opportunity to introduce yourself to our board members if you see them. Make sure our staff knows who you are. We held this conference because we wanted to meet you. We wanted to bring you together. Our strategy requires simultaneous action and investment in both the environment and the people of the Sierra Nevada. You can't separate the people from the place. The impact of environmental policy on people must be understood prior to implementation of the rule. Traditional ecological knowledge combined with local rural knowledge brings perspective to the conversation. Local residents and tribal leaders must lead restoration design and be involved in planning and implementation because it's cheaper. We already live up there. You don't have to fly or get a helicopter or come rent a hotel, although of course the hoteliers would love to have you come up. It's more effective because we live there. We know what we're seeing. It's our place. And you know what? It's ethical. It's just. It's not slower, harder to bring us rural folks in. Some folks just leap over the top of us as they start to try to pass legislation in the Capitol because, oh, you guys are all so conservative. Leaving us out of the conversation doesn't make it go faster. It makes it go slower, and it has bad consequences. Economic justice demands that the region is managed. The people that live in the region that is being managed be part of owning and managing that land. When I was a little girl, we used to have this line that says, the people that work the land should own the land. Well, we have the federal government owning most of our land. That might be considered us, we the people. But their leaders are thousands of miles away from my house. I can't go talk to them. We must not replicate the mistake of the gold rush, which was funded by distant investors building giant factories without being on site to see the death and the destruction that they were causing. The folks that funded and benefited from the gold rush never lived there and did not care about their impact. They just wanted the money. Stewardship can't be telegraphed or telephoned or Google Earthed, and it has to be done in person by people. It has to be done by people in the communities most affected by the problems. How audacious, really, is the Sierra Fund? Do we really think we can do this? Well, yes. Yes, we do, because we've already been doing it. We can do it because we have staying power. We can do it because we are of the Sierra and we are in love with the Sierra, and we will never, ever give up. And I am hoping that you will join us in taking this big view and making a big commitment to the work we're talking about and remembering to put people first. So the most important thing you can do right now and the rest of this day is to get to know each other after you listen to all the brilliant words of everyone that we've asked to come speak. Talk to each other, find out what your interests are, and help us, because you know what? We can do this. We can do this with your help. I want to thank you for coming to the conference today.